Hey, I think we're good.
Okay,
All
sweet.
right.
So we can go
Okay.
ahead and get started with the interview. So I'm Karson Brennan. I'm writing my paper on just petroleum engineering, and I was uh, going to ask Dr. Astrid Northrup over here about some questions on what her life looked like when she was working in the petroleum engineering field. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. So first off, I'd like to ask you just like, what did your job in the petroleum engineering field entail?
Perfect. So basically, in petroleum engineering, there are three main fields and then some subfields of engineering, of petroleum engineering. And that would be drilling engineering, production engineering, and reservoir engineering. And I worked in mostly in reservoir engineering, but basically the degree that you get for each of those areas would be the same. A degree as a Bachelor of Science in Petroleum Engineering or a closely related field. But drilling is more concerned with the mechanics of creating an oil well, uh, not damaging the surface nor the formation, and getting everything ready to produce. Then production engineers come in after a drilling engineer comes in and they set up the surface storage equipment, the surface moving equipment like pumping units or submersible pumps or whatever else. And then once again, everybody's always concerned with making sure that the damages to the surface and so forth are minimized. And then reservoir engineering, which is the field that I worked in, basically is concerned with what we did was we found the plays that people would drill. So reservoir is actually a misnomer. It's back in the old days, 100+ years ago. People thought that oil existed in big pools underneath the ground and that you would drill a hole into it and then the oil would come to the surface. So they called it a reservoir, just like a water reservoir. But in reality, that's not how it works. Oil exists in it's called the interstitial space, in the pore space in rocks or in fracture systems inside of rocks. And so what you're really trying to do is to geologically find a place where you're going to be able to maximize the flow of oil into a reservoir. And so with into a well bore. So an oil reservoir is not like a big pool. It's like a rock oil water system underneath the ground. So reservoir engineers work a lot with geologists in order to find and try to determine beforehand the extent of what you can expect, what you can hope for from a well. And it's shockingly inexact. I mean, the science plays out, and it's when you do the science right, you end up with the right answers, but the risks involved in oil exploration are extraordinarily high. So the returns have to be really high on given wells because you have to drill a lot of wells before you get one that actually does what is hoped for. So anyway, so reservoir engineers work with geologists. We also worked with what are called landmen, people who work with landowners to create a plan that's going to work with the landowner, that the landowner will agree to and give them money in order to have oil drilled on their land. And then finally work with the regulation industries. Like here in Wyoming, um, the Wyoming Oil and Gas Board of Oil and Gas determines how and where you can drill and under what conditions, and so you work with them as well. So it's pulling kind of those regulatory aspects together, as well as the geology and the science. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That was a really good,
Sure.
informative
Thank you.
answer.
Thank you.
Um, so my next question would be, well, I guess this one's an easy one. How long did you work in the petroleum engineering field?
I worked. So I worked about 10 years. So what I did was when I graduated from and this kind of ties into another, I'll answer another question separately from it, but this kind of ties into another question you had about finding a job. So when I graduated from college, when I got my bachelor's degree in petroleum engineering, the petroleum market was really dismal. And I did not actually get a job offer when I got my bachelor's degree. So my best job offer at that time was to go back to graduate school because one of my major professors had sort of hoped I would go to graduate school, and he'd saved a, a a pot of money for me to go back to graduate school because I always sort of toyed with the idea. I was married at the time, and my husband was still doing school, so it just sort of it made sense for our family, to stay in school. But it wasn't. I would be. I always refer to myself as a pretty reluctant scholar because it was not like I had a burning desire to go to graduate school. It was just
Yeah.
sort of like my best job offer at that time. So I stayed in school another couple of years and got my master's degree. And as it turned out, the oil industry, if you can even believe it, got even worse while I was in graduate school. And so jobs were even less plentiful. But at that point, I had an extra degree and I had another years of experience because I was working for the Montana Power Company as an intern at that time. And so I actually had 2 job offers when I got out of when I was finishing graduate school. I had one from the Montana Power Company and had another one from an independent oil company. And I chose to go to work for the independent oil company for a boatload of reasons, none of which was I would have loved to have worked for the Montana Power Company. It was just a choice of it was 2 good choices, and so I decided to do that. But I was very, very fortunate because at that time, you may pay attention to like the price of oil, and the oil industry is extremely cyclic. It goes up and down based on what oil is worth. And like right now, I think oil is going for about $85 a barrel. When I was before I got into when I was in college before I graduated, oil was getting close to 75 or $80 a barrel at that time, and that's not adjusted for dollars. It's just actual dollars. So by today's standards, it would be worth a lot more. If it was 80 or $90. By the time I got into graduate school, the price of oil had dropped to $8 a barrel. So about a tenth of what it had been worth before. And when that happens, jobs just go away, especially frontline jobs. So, like, there are different types of jobs you can take in the oil industry. If you go to work for the government, your job's going to be a lot more secure. If you go to work for a major oil company, your job is going to be very much more secure. And for just like I said, a variety of reasons, I've gone to work for an independent oil company. And so all of those things were playing in. It was like a whole lot less secure. Going to work for the Montana Power Company would have been very, very secure because that's a utility, and there would have been a lot of job security with that for a while. Now the company has gone bankrupt, so that's another story. But for 20 years, I would have been in a very secure position. Anyway, went to work for an independent oil company. My office when I started out was in Billings, Montana. I was then moved to Denver, Colorado, but I worked all over the place. I worked in the Williston Basin and the Cedar Creek Anticline, and I worked on the Navajo Indian Reservation. Um, and I worked in Canada. I worked in both Saskatchewan and Alberta, but my office was always stateside. Anyway, and I did that for several years, and then I was able to take after you get a certain amount of experience with a certain amount of education, you can become a licensed professional engineer or PE. And I did that as soon as I could because once you become a PE, you can work for yourself. So I got my PE license and I started working for myself, and I did a whole bunch of different jobs. I worked for one firm here in Powell. I'd moved back to Powell by that time, and I had 2 firms that I worked for in Billings. And then I started working for another firm in Cody and I wasn't doing oil and gas, but I was doing the design of irrigation laterals, which was really fun. I
Mhm.
did that for several years, which there's a lot of similarities. It's actually a lot easier to move water than it is to move oil. And
Yeah.
it's not as if you spill a little bit, nobody gets too excited about it. You don't spill oil, you just don't. It's just a terrible situation. So I had a good time with that as well. So I did that for about 10 years. I graduated from college and I actually started here at Northwest College 11 years after I had finished my
Okay.
master's degree. So, yeah.
Wait, okay. So then my next question is like overall work enjoyment. Like, would you say that you really enjoyed your job as you worked there?
I
Like
did.
between both the water, the irrigation lines and stuff like that, and then also like the general drilling companies and stuff like that.
Absolutely. It was working in, first of all, starting with the first part, working strictly in oil and gas. The science behind petroleum engineering to me was just the most fun that you could ever have. I mean, it's this combination of, it's very diversified, it's a lot of engineering, and it's a lot of fluid behavior, which is something engineering students tend to find out that they go into one of three camps. They like to design things that sit still, they like to design things that move, and then a few people find out later on that they really like fluids and things that work in a continuum, and I turned out to be the latter. That was kind of, I mean, I liked stuff that sat still, you learn that first in engineering, and then I really liked stuff that moved, which was the next thing you find out, and then when I found out about continuum later on, it was just like, "Yep, this is what's for me." So I really enjoyed it from the point of view of the science and what we got to do, and I liked, it was always a little mysterious, oil's always just, it's a little mysterious because you can't really look at it and you can't really be 100% sure of what you're doing. You're sort of like taking a leap of faith, and depend, not faith really like is in religious faith, but as in trusting the science to take you to the next step, you know? And I like that whole process of just working through the most logical outcomes based on what was going on. And it was really rewarding when you did that. Everything works and it happens the way that you expect it would, that you predict it would happen, and that was really satisfying for me. The other thing I really liked about it, at least in the beginning of my career, I love to travel. I still travel all the time. And there was a lot of travel involved in my job. I was usually in my office about a week a month, and the rest of the time I was out, doing things. And I wasn't necessarily in terribly glamorous places, but I always got to sort of see things from a different point of view. And like, for example, I mentioned earlier, I worked on the Navajo Indian Reservation for a couple of years. And it was, it's just such a different culture. And it was so interesting to just sort of get to be immersed in living that way, you know? So I enjoyed that a lot. I enjoyed the science of the job. Um, After a while, and this was not at first at all, but after a while, I became I really got tired of traveling for work. I wanted to keep traveling for enjoyment and for my own personal satisfaction, but traveling for work is not exactly the same because
Mhm.
you have to work, right? So you can't really devote yourself to sort of experiencing the whole thing. So there were a lot of times, um, for example, like once again, going back to the reservation, there were some beautiful historical sites that I didn't really get to spend very much time on. And so later on, I went back, and just so that I could experience it. It's like I was really curious about certain things and I read about certain things. And then I just went back to sort of learn about them without having to get up at 6 and go to work in the morning. And so that was, but so that became a dissatisfaction to me, but in the beginning, it was not. And as I got to a different point in my life, I just wanted to be, um, I just didn't want to have to do that anymore. I didn't want to be at the beck and call of an organization. I kind of wanted to just freestyle my life a little bit more. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Okay, and then we got two final questions. So first being, I guess, how about okay, so this one's kind of like out of the fly, but this one's just
Sure.
one that I kind of came up with. But it's how did you enjoy the curriculum while working through college? Like, would you say that it was extremely difficult, or did you think it was manageable?
Mhm. Well, it was any engineering curriculum is pretty tough. I mean, even if you're really well suited to it, and even if you're really intelligent, everybody has to work hard. One of the reasons is, like, a standard Bachelor of Science degree is 120 credits, which means 15 credits a semester forever. Um, Engineering degrees tend to be, instead of 120, they tend to be between 128 and 140. So there's really kind of like an extra semester built into it anyway. The other thing is there's very few electives, so uh, you really have to stick to business, and you have to take science and math every single semester. And you do that for about 2 years. It's like the engineering curriculum that we teach here at Northwest College, for example, the first 2 years is pretty much the same for everybody, regardless if you want to be electrical engineer, petroleum engineer, whatever. So it's really difficult, but I found it to be very rewarding. And I've studied a lot of other things along the line in my career here. I've gotten a couple of other academic credentials, and I finished my PhD while I was working here. And I've taken a lot of other classes just in education and psychology and just all over the place. And really, if you're cut out for engineering, nothing else is as satisfying. I mean, I don't even know how to put it that way because I do not mean to be like, I mean, it sounds kind of vain when I say that because I know those subjects are very satisfying to other people. But if your mind works the way an engineer's mind works, there's just nothing that's ever going to be as interesting and meaningful. So, I found parts of the curriculum to be difficult. For example, I always did very well in math and physics and chemistry. That was sort of like my areas of strength. As a petroleum engineer, I ended up taking a lot of geology courses, and I was never very good at little geology. I was much better at big structural geology stuff. But in the beginning, when we were looking at rocks and minerals and talking about the porphyritic texture of a rock or describing what kind of gray a rock was, I mean, my brain just was like, I didn't get it. And so I worked really hard to become an okay geology student. So, and also the other thing is I went to Montana Tech, which is a mining engineering school, and the geologists up there are really hardcore. I mean, it's like they're teaching that's kind of the big leagues for them. So I was outclassed with that, and that was really difficult for me. So I was always sort of hanging by a thread trying to keep myself above water, trying to keep my head above water with geology, but the rest of it came very easily, or not easily, but I mean the rest of it came naturally to me. So I love the curriculum. It's really structured. Like I said, there aren't a lot of electives. You don't really have a lot of choices about what courses you take, and you get to know you get to know how to approach material in a certain way, and that carries through in sort of a discipline for how it teaches you how to be you learn how to be an engineering student by being an engineering student. So, and I was also really just happy. I really loved the fact that I could kind of do it all, that it was very diversified, that I could do a lot of math and a lot of engineering and a lot of chemistry and a lot of physics. So I like that better than just being in one discipline. So,
Okay, and then the final question, we talked about pay. If you
mm,
wanted to elaborate, I
yeah.
would either just take a simple answer of like, yes, the pay was satisfactory, or like, if you wanted to elaborate a little bit further, if you were comfortable, I would greatly appreciate that as well.
Yes.
Um,
Well, the pay was terrific. I mean, the pay in engineering, any field of engineering is great, and petroleum engineering is among the highest, uh, starting salaries. I mean, I bought my first house when I was 25 years old. I never had any I got, and the other thing too is I had a really good salary. It was always commensurate. I never had Some people have asked me this, you haven't asked me this directly, but I don't feel like I was ever discriminated against or got less money because I was a woman. I actually got more money because I had a master's degree, which was not typical. So they bumped me up on the pay scale, but I always had enough money. They always gave me bonuses every time you do anything at that time, at least, an independent oil company, once again, which is different. They would just like that was their MO, was to just throw money at you. So there was, if you did something extra, you get more money. If you had a play that was really successful, you get more money. If you stayed 3 years, you get more money. It was just money all the time. So the money was great. The money was I could not I can't even tell you. I mean, and I was not, I'm not really like a spendthrifty person, but I had, I took while I was working as an engineer, I became a private pilot, which is a very expensive hobby, but I could do that easily. I could buy all the clothes and I could, that I wanted. I could buy all the cars I wanted. I could buy the house that I wanted at a very young age, and so yes, the money was great. No problem with the money at all. So
So I appreciate that. That was kind of an
yeah.
interesting question. I was wondering if, it's kind of like an awkward subject. Sometimes people like to answer that. I know my parents wouldn't. So like they're just kind of those type of people. But I greatly appreciate just you
Sure.
answering all of my questions, and I find this is going to be really helpful in writing the rest of my paper.
Oh,
I've
good. Well,
kind of
I'm glad to hear it. So, well, and best of luck to you, Carson. I think you have a bright future ahead of you. It's just finals week is probably not the time to start thinking about your future, but I
yeah.
think you have a lot going for you, and I think when the dust settles, I think you're poised for success. So,
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
all right, have a wonderful day today.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye.